So first off, we got Leon Fayer.
Hello, everybody. Let's get it started. So how many of you, by show of hands, have never done any public speaking? Oh, it's a good group of people. So public speaking is pretty awful. You stress about what to talk about, what you know that other people don't. And God forbid you get accepted. Then you got to scramble to put together the slides, find the right pictures, because that's the most important part. And then you have to go on stage in front of people who not only know the topics better than you do, but they're also silently judging you. At least that's what the voice in your head always tells you. I mean, realistically, it's not too bad, right? I mean, you always have something to say about, people are pretty nice. So I want to talk about a couple of things to help people to get into public speaking. So first of all, you are smarter than you think you are. Or the audience is dumber than you think they are. I mean, depends how you want to look at it. But you always have something to talk about, something that makes sense, something that you know about that you can share with people that will be useful to them. Second of all, okay. Okay then. Anyways, so second of all, audience is pretty sympathetic to what you do. So if I could stand here for 15 seconds in an awkward silence and nobody threw Rotten Tomatoes at me, you can do pretty much anything you want on the stage and not fail miserably, which is usually the biggest problem. And the third thing to remember is everybody got a story to tell, right? Whether it's a story of success, a story of failure, something you like, something you hate, everybody's got a story. And honestly, that story can be anything. Like, think about it. You talk to your peers in a hallway track about something. That's a story. If I come out to any group of people during the happy hour tonight and say Docker sucks, it will start a holy war. And it will start hours and hours worth of content that you can come out on stage and really rant about, right? So submit everywhere. Like, what's the downside? There's hundreds of conferences a year just in the US area that you can submit to and probably get accepted to. I mean, what's the worst thing that can happen? You're gonna get rejected? Like, speakers who do this pretty consistently get rejected on, I don't know, 3 out of 5 submissions and they send on public safety. You get rejected. Maybe you don't fit the topic. Maybe there's a duplicate topic. There's a lot of reasons CAPs get rejected. The only reason you can fail if you don't submit at all. And there's a lot of different venues that you can submit. There is tutorials. There is an hour talk. There is a 30-minute talks. There is a lightning talk. Because lightning talk is 5 minutes. Anybody can rant about something for 5 minutes. Case in point. There's also Ignite talks, which I also don't recommend doing, but let's pretend I didn't say that. And once you get accepted, you don't have to follow a particular way of preparing for your talk. Like, you can plan it any way you want. I know people who are really diligent and actually memorize what they have to say, and other people like me are just wing it when they get on stage. I do recommend practicing on people. Practice in front of people, talk to your peers, to your colleagues, to your friends, because honestly, talking to a mirror or reciting in your head over is not the same as coming out of here and blinding lights in front of all of you. The one note I have to say is don't be boring. Like, when I said the audience will forgive almost everything, this is the almost part. Like, be entertaining, right? And I don't mean like do cartwheels on the stage or do interpretive dance, which I have done. But be yourself, right? Talk like you would talk over a beer or in a hallway with a peer or something else. Just have a conversation. Another thing I would recommend is don't read. And by that, I don't mean don't have a notes with you or don't write down what you want to say. I mean, don't put it on a slide and just come out and read your slides. If you put that much effort into putting your thoughts down, write a blog. I feel like we all can read here, maybe. And don't overwhelm with information. Generally, from any given talk, the people will remember only 1 or 2 things. And frankly, you want to make it as concise as possible. Don't put a lot of text or a lot of code on a page. Nobody's going to read this. Approach it from this perspective. Let's be honest. We're all vain. So approach it from a perspective where people can take a picture of your slide and then tweet it out. Right. That's what it's all about. So put the less content of it and just tell your story. You don't have to try to convince people. You don't have to follow an academic standard. Just come out here and tell about your failures, about your successes, something that interests you or something you're passionate. And this is pretty much it for me. I hope I inspired at least some people to come out on the stage. And hopefully when I come here next year, I will see one or more of you on the stage. Thanks.
All right, thanks a lot, Leon. So up next, we got Mark Waite from CloudBees. So,
thank you. So I appreciate Leon's comments. I've got to be able to see it. Git is a distributed version control system that is market-leading, fast, and free. What's not to love about market-leading, fast, and free? Well, it remembers things. And it remembers things really well. And it remembers them forever. So mistakes that become commonplace, in fact, get stuck in your source code and stay there forever. And they will remind you over and over again. Some of the mistakes that you might make might include things that will cause you to clone slowly, or to pull slowly, or to get slow status reports, or to damage your history so that you can't find what you had there before. Those kind of problems hurt. And the intent of this talk is to remind you there are ways to recover. So if you got slow clones, you can remember that Git clones the entire repository. And because it clones the entire repository, it's bringing all your mistakes every time. Remember that because you can fix that by not putting big binaries into your repository. Just don't bloat it, all right? Use large file support. Use a binary repository like Artifactory or Nexus. Other problems that might cause you to have slow clones, you may be stuck. You can't avoid having a large repository. Fine. Use a reference copy locally on your disk, which will let you avoid the copy a second, third, fourth, fifth, or 25th time. Reference copies use what's already on your disk. Another way is to not copy history you don't need. Shallow clone will give you just a depth of the history instead of the whole history. So remember shallow clone, reference repositories. In really advanced cases, you may need a nearby cache where your monster has to sit close to your system that's using it. You can do that. It's just more work, but you can set up local servers, use those local servers, and then push to the central server. We use this technique. We had a multi-gigabyte Git repository sitting in the US, and we put the master in Germany, pulled from the US, pushed to Germany. Worked great. Keeps it quick, and yet keeps your authoritative central. So be mindful that these kind of things cost you when you make that mistake of putting large stuff into your Git repository. Now, another way to deal with it is, what if my pulls, my incremental changes, are too slow? Well, Git pull retrieves everybody's updates. Everything that's in that repository that's new comes down. Unrelated, you don't need. So if you can avoid the unrelated, narrow your ref spec to only the branches you need. If you'll narrow the ref spec, you get less data coming at you, you use less disk, you're happier. It helps a bunch, especially in CI jobs, to narrow this ref spec. Another way that you may get bit is if you've got a large repo or lots of files, local Git status calls may be slow, particularly if you made the mistake of using a network file system, or if, like me, you have the good fortune of being on Windows. The file system scanner on Windows slows things down. Use a local file system. Use a fast file system. They're just better. You'll be happier. Your code will be happier. Now, in addition, Git is a power tool. It gives you the ability to rewrite history. That's great. We need it. We need to be able to reset. We need to be able to rebase. However, that power tool can, if it gets pushed to your friends, can do real serious damage. Keep backups of your central repository. Keep copies out with your developers so that when you lose it, you can push it back. Save yourself the pain. You can also turn off forced pushes if you'd like on your central. Reminders, don't commit big binaries. Use large file support. Don't waste your disk space. Use reference repositories. Don't copy history you don't need. Use narrow ref specs and use a shallow clone. Don't put unrelated stuff in a single repository. Use a new repo when you're doing something new. Don't use slow file systems. Go fast. Don't force push, it hurts. I'm Mark Waite. I'm the Git plugin maintainer for Jenkins. I'm a Jenkins contributor. I'm a Jenkins user. And I'm a CloudBees technical evangelist. I'm the dad of 8 kids, and my wife is wonderful. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks a lot, Mark. It's always good to hear something more about Git that we didn't already know. All right, next up we have Jay Gordon from MongoDB.
Hey, what's up? How you doing, everybody? Make noise. It's a tech conference. So hey, I'm Jay, and I'm a developer advocate. And I'm going to talk a little bit about it. That's Rico, and I was a sysadmin for a long time. I was on call for about 10 years. Not 10 years in one job, 10 years for about 3 different jobs. It was brutal, and I dealt with burnout. Because let's face it, what's DevOps days without a burnout conversation? Come on. So yeah, I dealt with burnout, and I started really making some considerations on where I was going with my career. So I started to think, is it really time to change my career? And it's scary. I mean, how many of you have decided to get a new job within the last year or so? I mean, it's a lot of work. You have to go and you have to get out of your comfort zone. And so I started to think, I can go in a new direction. And I tried to think, like, is there a role at the company I work in that I can actually do something that makes use of the actual skill set that I have, and then also allows me to kind of stay in the role. So I thought, what about sales? All right, I'm sure that there's some salespeople here. You do great jobs, but I don't want to do your job. I don't want to be tied to a number. I don't want to be tied to dollars. I want to be tied to completing tasks and being part of things, which made me think about support. I got my career started in support, and it was really great, and I got to speak with people all the time, get them through really nasty issues, but the fact is that support can suck after a while, being on call and all that. So then I had to ask myself, like, what's the next step? What do I want to do with my life? I'm going to turn 40 this year. Holy shit. So I decided, what do I want to do next? And I thought, let me start looking around a little more and watching people. And there were all these really incredible peers that are out there that were doing things that I super respected. And not only that, but they knew how to make information easily digestible to people. And that's really what it comes down to. So developer advocacy, one, it's all about working with peers. Because just like DevOps, you have to work as a team. You have to create content to help them, and they are eventually going to want to teach others. And that's a huge part of developer advocacy. And you can actually be part of an engineering team by breaking stuff. You can learn and break shit for fun. It's one of the best parts of my job. Nobody tells me, Jay, you shouldn't break that. They say, why didn't you break it enough to figure out how to keep it from breaking for other people? So I used the skill set that I already had, because I already knew tons about Chef and Linux and AWS and all these other types of DevOps practices that we use. And I said, I've got to try something different with my life because, holy shit, I'm turning 40 this year. So I decided I want to try things that were different, like building communities, getting people together and having them be able to interact with one another, whether it's via some like advocacy hub that we use or Slack or in person. It's bringing people together so that they can learn about great stuff. So it's time for the DevOps Days Classic, an analogy. Everybody watches Rick and Morty or has heard of it, right? Cool. It's a cartoon about a grandpa and a grandson, and they get into really wacky adventures. And here's one of the things. An episode of this show ended up begetting advocacy for it. So a bunch of people decided that based on a storyline on this 22-minute cartoon that's not even on a real network, that they were really going to go and check out something that didn't really exist in the real world right now, but they got it to exist. So there was a dipping sauce for the movie Mulan that existed years and years ago, and then McDonald's took it off the market. But because it was so wanted by the fans, that they went out to the streets and they advocated. They traveled to an hour on their car to go to a different McDonald's to get a packet of McDonald's nugget dipping sauce. And that's the kind of advocacy that you want to create, that passion, that interest. You want people to wonder, what's my sauce that I'm going to be able to provide to individuals who are eventually going to implement technology that I represent? So I started really thinking, what's my secret sauce? What's my Szechuan sauce? And I started thinking that maybe it was kind of like tech conferences. That's the way you get people to go places and be part of it. I mean, look at everybody here. You're here because you're an advocate at some point of DevOps practicing. And it's really neat because you try to create tools and information, and please don't tell them I put that web scale bear in there because they'll friggin' kill me. But anyway, but I get to create videos, I get to go and speak places, I get to take part with teams and build all this information so that you can go ahead and try out the sauce. And by the way, that sauce was such a big deal that McDonald's, sometime I believe last month, ordered 30 million new packets of it to make sure that it was well distributed and out, and it wasn't just a limited time thing. So anyway, thanks a lot. Check out Developer Advocacy. It's an awesome job.
Thank you very much. All right, up next we have Christine Rohacz from ThoughtWorks.
Thanks. All right, so how many of you have been involved in a production incident that was related to or caused by human error? Raise your hands. Great. I'm in good company then. Well, about 6 months ago, I experienced this for the first time. And I'm Christine, by the way. And I ran a script that accidentally brought a halt to all production traffic for my client at the time. Yeah, thank you. It was a pretty big incident, and I was pretty terrified after it happened. I was looking for the biggest rock I could to hide under. I was ashamed and I was guilty of what I had done, and I was honestly terrified of the consequences might be for me. So I had this rush of emotions coming towards me, and I didn't know what to do with them. But I understood why. When you look at history's most recent examples of human errors, such as the S3 outage, the false ballistic missile in Hawaii, or the Equifax breach, each one of them claimed human error as one of the leading causes, and they each made national headlines. So you can kind of understand why I was a little bit terrified at the time. And the reality of the situation is, we like to point fingers at each other really easily, and we do this in our industry a lot. And the reason we do it is because it's a simple answer for what went wrong, but it doesn't tell us why. But it also removes us from stressful situations, which is a natural human response, and that's understandable. But I started to ask more questions, like what exactly is human error, why do we do this, what do we get from pointing fingers at each other, and what are we trying to get from it? So to answer the first question, what is human error, I found a pretty good definition for it. And I found that human error was just a label. It's a label for an unsatisfactory result of what we believe someone should have done but didn't do at the time. And it doesn't tell us any context about why it made sense at the time or how they ended up making this mistake. So it leaves us with some more questions. And for those of us that accept human error as the root cause, though, often our answer to this problem is to remove the human from the system or change their role in the system. After all, we see them as the greatest safety threat to our systems. And this makes sense because we're victims of hindsight bias. And what hindsight bias is it tells us that looking past on an incident and the person who caused it, it becomes obvious that they made a mistake and they should have known better. So this points to the human as the root cause of the incident. And so it should make sense that we should just remove them from the system. Many of us stop there, and that's a problem because the story doesn't stop there. When we stop there, we stop looking for bigger problems in our organizations and in our teams, and we're making our systems no more safer than they were before. So the reality is we work in really complex systems, right? I don't need to tell you this. But in these complex systems, there's numerous possible paths to error. And each day, we're running around trying to avoid all these possible paths to error and not accidentally find one, hopefully at least. And so these possible paths to error often consist of a number of preconditions that need to take place before a human becomes involved. And a precondition can be a wrong decision, a wrong design, and then the human intervenes with a wrong action, and that's what causes the accident. And on top of all that cognitive complexity that we have to manage and balance, we have organizational complexities. These are often the performance pressures placed on us by stakeholders to get things done faster rather than better. And so we manage that on top of our cognitive load, and lo and behold, we try to automate the best we can to try and solve all our problems because that'll clearly eliminate all the problems that humans introduce into the system, right? But your automation is no more prepared for these preconditions than you are. After all, you designed it. So how can it deal with new preconditions that are introduced into the system every day? So we're roped in by cognitive complexity and organizational complexity, and honestly, it's a surprise to me that we don't see human error more, because we have to balance these huge mental loads each day. And so now, human error is starting to look more like the tip of an iceberg. It's a symptom rather than a cause. And in fact, I believe there is no root cause. But underneath that iceberg, there's systematic vulnerabilities deeper within our organizations and our teams. And when we look just at the top of it, we're ignoring everything else underneath. And that's effectively the same as digging your heads in the sand. Because when you point your finger at somebody, you're ignoring the problems that lie underneath, and you're preventing your systems from becoming safer. So you're ignoring everything else around you. And so with that, I would say you should promote a just culture. And a just culture is one where we differentiate holding developers and engineers accountable, but embracing the mistakes they make, because those mistakes are what make our system safer and better for the future. And so you can promote a just culture in a lot of ways, and one of them is a blameless post-incident report, just as an example. And in this blameless post-incident or post-mortem report, we focus on the remediation steps, not who did what and when or what the timeline of events are, but we want to ensure that this doesn't happen again. And we do that by resolving and remediating. So with that, I'll leave you with a quote from John Osbaugh, who's a leader in the blameless culture and just culture, and that's that humans will make mistakes. So allow it, encourage it, and embrace it. Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot, Christine. All right, so up next we have Corene Ross from Ross Search Partners.
Good afternoon. My name is Corene Ross, and I'm a co-founder of Ross Search Partners. We are a recruiting firm based in Littleton. As a recruiter, I have spoken with so many candidates about their experience when they're interviewing for a new job. I'd like to share some of that information with you so that when you are interviewing, when your company is hiring, you'll have some ideas about how to make your process better and have more offers get accepted. Some of the main things that I'll cover are how strong first impressions are so important, communicating, involving the right people, how asking for feedback can help you improve, and some common problems that steer people away from your company. We live in one of the hottest markets in the nation. You all know this. Think about how many LinkedIn messages that you get and phone calls about prospective jobs. The leverage has shifted to the candidate side. Let's face it, hiring is so difficult. Interviewing is a two-way street. The candidates are evaluating you as much as you are them. Step back and take a look at your process from their point of view. Are what they experience from your company, are they strong first impressions? Think about speed dating. You have one shot to make a good impression. With interviewing, it's kind of like that as well. So when you reach out to them with calling them or with emails, it's got to have good energy. Show your personality. Be excited about what your company's product or services are. Everyone wants to work for a company that's building something meaningful, but let's face it, we all don't work for companies that build something super flashy or a work environment isn't exciting. Give them a demo. Maybe talk about some of the projects that your team is working on with the developers. Share some success stories about how you and your team have helped them with the DevOps cultural shift. Be strategic about who you involve in your interviews. Include peers, but bring in people more senior that they can learn from. What about including someone in product or customer success who can help you determine cultural fit? The tech screen, the ones that I hear the best feedback about, they're interactive, where people are working through problems and solutions together. This gives you a chance to assess their troubleshooting skills, but them a chance to just see how your team communicates with each other. What people really dislike are those textbook questions, the ones that you would only get right if you just studied that topic. Look at your questions and make sure that they're really helping you assess aptitude and talent. Do you involve a take-home project? If you do, make it reasonable and relevant. We all only have so much time after work, and if your project is too big of an ask, this is probably when they're gonna back out. Is scheduling easy enough? Stick to the time frame that you tell them and try to just avoid canceling if you can. Respecting their time now, it's an indicator of how you treat other people in your company. How many steps do you require before getting to an offer? If your process takes too long and decision-making is slow, you're probably gonna lose them to something else. Interview fatigue is a real thing. It's natural to be on the fence with people, but don't wait until the end to win them over. Show them around the office earlier on. Maybe go off-site and get a cup of coffee. Just get to know them a little bit. There is an emotional component to accepting a new job. Communicate. Lack of feedback is frustrating for everyone. And from my experience, it is the #1 complaint from job seekers. Even if you don't have answers, People appreciate the updates and it keeps you in a positive light. Ghosting, probably better known from the dating world, ghosting unfortunately exists in interviewing as well. Angry candidates, they go post things on Glassdoor and they spread bad news with their friends. And all that's gonna do is make hiring more difficult. Ask for feedback from different people. Ask the candidate for feedback, even if they decline your offer. If they know that you value their input and you want to improve, they'll help you out. All right, you guys are ready to interview. I encourage you, use some of these tips. Make your process better. Be excited, communicate, move quickly, involve the right people, and ask for feedback. I talk about these things with candidates and companies every day. If you want to reach out more, just find me. My name is Corene Ross, and I'm with Ross Search Partners. Thanks.
All right, thanks a lot. It's always great to hear about good hiring practices. All right, next up we have Andrew Suderman from ReadyTalk.
I'm gonna mix it up and use the podium. Yeah, just hit this. This is Grassroots Kube, a case study on influencing change in a software organization. More specifically, ReadyTalk, a 16-year-old software company that has allowed me the rare opportunity to grow immensely in the couple of short years that I've been there. Over the last year, we've seen a change in mindset across engineering. Where we used to build monoliths, we build services, and Kubernetes is no longer just that shiny, cool thing that nobody has the time to try. It's now the de facto standard for new projects, and it's being considered as a target for migrating older services to the cloud. This means that we're building more robust and maintainable services than we ever have before, with less duplicated effort and a smaller ops team. My goal in telling you this is to provide you with a set of tools that you can use to enable change in your organization. There was no single one thing that enabled us to make this change, but there were a few things that allowed us to overcome the obstacles that lie in our path. The first was a pre-existing company culture of empowering engineers. ReadyTalk has never been a top-down sort of company. So this change had to come from the bottom. This can never be entirely one-sided, but ReadyTalk wasn't going to change just because some C-level mandated that we get the DevOps. On the flip side of that, we had amazing management support. They trusted us and allowed us to push back where we felt necessary. This enabled us the freedom and the time to drive forward with best practices. When we asked, they made decisions that freed up our time and resources. Next, we look at a team, a small group of hardworking and passionate individuals with a shared desire to build excellent infrastructure. We came from both dev and ops, and we had seen what didn't work in the past. We had a purpose, and from that we developed a Tao. In Chinese philosophy, Tao is the absolute principle underlying the universe, combining within itself the principles of yin and yang, and signifying the way, or code of behavior, that is in harmony with the natural order. Now, I'm not talking about the whole universe here, but we took this concept and we applied it to our own work. With a little borrowing from HashiCorp, we wrote down our Tao. We do all of our work according to that Tao, and we measure ourselves against it to determine our level of success. The central principle of our Tao is to enable developers to control their infrastructure from application all the way to the customer with as little effort as possible. That infrastructure should live in code, and as much of that code as possible should belong to the developers themselves. Developers shouldn't have to know every aspect of the infrastructure, but we weren't afraid to ask them to learn a few things along the way. Our vision was that other teams would want to utilize these tools because it enabled them to become better software developers. Of course, we all know software developers love change. In the early days, our excitement and fervor around service architectures, containers, and Kubernetes was met with skepticism and doubt. The developers weren't going to change their entire process of developing just because some hipster told them they should. So we built some stuff, and we used our weekly demos to show it off. I really can't say enough about how the smallest bit of success and even failure can energize the people around you. This saw a lot of progress, but it still wasn't enough. So we hosted some hackathons. We dedicated them to containers and Kubernetes. We provided environments, guidance, workshops, and time for developers to experience the infrastructure for themselves. As more and more of them joined in on this experiment, we started seeing a lot of holes. We watched a lot of things break, and we fixed them. We had to constantly learn new technologies and tools in order to keep up with the needs of the various teams running on our infrastructure. And we failed repeatedly. We wrote a lot of shitty code, and we threw it out when a better solution presented itself. We added the expectation of failure into the TAO itself. It's inevitable that parts of what we do become obsolete. Abandon your glue and walk down the happy path. We constantly evangelize our goals and practices across the company to the point that we sound like broken Kubernetes records. We go to conferences and meetups to gain new knowledge, and we bring that back to our teams. Again, demos are an amazing platform for that. It's very difficult to create meaningful and lasting change within any size of organization. Given the right tools and dedicated people, I think it's something that we at ReadyTalk have managed to achieve. Time will tell if it lasts, but I think that we laid a solid foundation. If you take any one part of this talk with you, remember this: decide where you want to go, lay out the principles behind that direction, and use every decision that you make to move a little bit further in that direction. I can't promise you rainbows and unicorns, but I can assure you that you'll be better off than where you started. I know we are. If you want more details or you just want to talk about Kubernetes, you can reach me at one of these places. Thanks for listening.
All right, great. Next up, we have Corey Quinn. He's kind of a jerk.
Well, he's not wrong. So normally in these talks, I get up here and I make fun of big, successful multinational companies like Google or Netflix. So I asked Twitter, if I make fun of United Airlines, am I punching down? And the response was yes, but they really deserve it. So I do a lot of things. I write a weekly newsletter that makes fun of AWS. You might pick up a theme here. I have a podcast. I wind up doing a fair bit of work for companies here and there. But my day job is as a consultant, and I solve one problem. I fix the horrifying AWS build, which means I fly a lot. If you fly on United enough, namely 10 million miles, they will name a plane after you. I am not kidding. I'm not there yet. Anyone here ever bought in-flight Wi-Fi? So I noticed this a month or two ago. So I log in to spend way too much money to get way too little internet that goes to space. I put in my username, I put in my password. Things are great. This is a fairly typical approach. And then once I've logged in, it's saved my credit card data, and then it hits me with a CAPTCHA. Well, you have all the information. Are you sure you're not a robot? You might be one. And this got me thinking that maybe everything was terrible. And sure enough, I started doing some research. And yes, everything United does is terrible. They've had a lot of problems in the headlines. They have challenges with every aspect of anything that's customer facing. And when they try and fix things, it doesn't always make it better. I get it. They deal with the general public, by which I mean jerks like me. However, this doesn't solve the problem of prescription strength, pet service, or other things that need to be taken care of in this context. So I went digging a little further, and sure enough, they've had problems with data breaches in the past. In 2014 and 15, there were a number of reported incidents that made me raise an eyebrow, and they did respond to these things reasonably well. They instituted a whole bunch of sweeping security changes. But other people started calling out what these changes looked like. When you have places like the New York Times, Washington Post, Krebs and Security, TechCrunch, all saying your new approach is terrible, well, maybe there's a problem. We've all seen the security questions that you drop down and you pick the question. They do the same thing with the answers. I'm not kidding. Your favorite sport, it turns out they do not want you to pick MMA. Trust me on that one. So I went into why this was in their frequently asked questions section, and they said they did some research, and keyloggers are a major security concern. I'm wondering if they just checked in their own security department, because I don't see those very often in the real world. I generally tend to find myself in a world where maybe that keylogger could also intercept, I don't know, screen captures? And then it's worse, because they also have the first 5 characters of your password that you just speak into the phone. That says nothing good about security. And some poor jerk had to fill this actual question out. One of your answers for a favorite pizza topping is mashed potatoes. Is that really a pizza topping? Yes, it is. They lie. No, it's not. I can have a debate with you about pineapple, but mashed potato is right out. Now, this is better than it used to be. It used to have a 4-digit PIN to log in. This was reasonable, I guess, at the time. Mine was 1234. Why? Because I'm an idiot, and I want to have the same thing as on my luggage. Great. But then in 2010, I got married. True story. And when I did, my wife and I both changed our last names. And that was a bit of a challenge with some companies. Some were better than others. My bank and my insurance company were disturbingly lax about it. Oh, you changed your last name? Cool, we've got that recorded. Do you want paperwork on that? Nah, we trust you, it's fine. United wanted me not only send the marriage certificate, fine, but also a letter explaining the change. There's a code of conduct. I can't tell you what was in that letter. They changed the name. The takeaway here is that if you're debating doing something from a security point of view, reach out to cynical, sarcastic people and ask how desperate they're going to make fun of you for it. And if they start teasing you, go in a different direction. This talk has been made possible in part by United Airlines, voted Reader's Choice for Beat the Crap Out of Me magazine. I hope they can take a joke, because if not, I'm going to have to take a punch. This is also made possible by Reactive Ops, a company that I advise. They solve the world's problems by pouring Kubernetes on them. They are hiring, and they pay Bay Area salaries for fully remote jobs. Have a chat with them. Best part about them, they ask me before doing ridiculous things, and I'm already writing the talk. If you've enjoyed this talk, I'm giving another one tomorrow, Terrible Ideas in Git, similar to the Git tips you got earlier, only awful. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Corey. All right. Last but not least, we have Brian Ray.
All right, how are you guys doing? Last one. That's going to be a tough one to follow. Okay, you guys, so every so often my Twitter stream, probably yours, will include some super annoyed developer complaining about a tale of great sorrow. And the tragedy? They've been spammed by a recruiter offering them a job. Horror, right? So fellow devs, listen, I beg you, stop complaining about recruiters because you sound like a total asshole. You're probably a really delightful person in real life, but you just kind of sound obnoxious. So I've made this argument a couple times online, and there's always another camp that will kind of arise. And what better way really to delve into the nuances of their side and mine than to call upon the assistance of the noble gents of, pause, American choppers. So I say, friends, devs, countrymen, times are tough out there, and it is not a good look when devs complain about being approached for lucrative jobs out of the clear blue sky. And then they say, that job you're talking about is completely unrelated to my area of expertise, and if the recruiter had even half a clue or took 2 minutes to research my background, they would know that. I say, 2 minutes? You mean the same 2 minutes you just wasted getting on Twitter to showboat about being bugged by a recruiter? Here's a crazy idea. How about you just ignore the email? That doesn't work. And so they say, I do ignore their emails, but then they also cold call me on my personal cell while I'm at work, which disrupts my flow and makes me look bad when I have to leave the room to make a call. And I kind of shrug and say, look, you're a smart person. Either answer the phone or, here's an idea, hand it to your boss and say, hey, Mrs. Manager, they want to hire me. What's your current thoughts on my title and current compensation? But now, for real, some technical recruiters, and we know this, are a little bit clueless. Is that true? Yes. But are you glad that you have your job and not theirs? Also, yes. Then let's try gratefulness as a response to that instead of complaining about it in public. Because do you make over $60,000 a year? Chances are you do. You're among the top 0.19% richest people on the planet. Do you make less than $60,000 a year? Then respond to the fucking recruiter. Either way, be grateful. Be grateful that while millions upon millions of people are looking for work, and in some parts of the world, real drinking water, our skills are super valuable, and demand outweighs supply. I said a second ago that some technical recruiters are clueless, and probably the best example of all time of this is DHH being offered a mid-level Rails position at Groupon. That's comical. How many Rails years of experience do you have? All of them. But look, People are already fed up with Silicon Valley and the tech scene in general. And so let's not make it easier for them to hate us by driving cars like this and then complaining about irrelevant job offers. I love DHH. I read literally everything the man writes. I've never agreed with the example that he sets in terms of, with respect to recruiters. There's just no reason to mock a human being for being bad at their job when the collateral damage is that your flow state was interrupted. So when I've posted these thoughts online, like these comments totally personalize my position here. Hey recruiters, call me all you want. Aw man, I would like to be recruited. Exactly. Not quoted here are the 45 million Americans currently living below the poverty line, although I can paraphrase their sentiment to us, which is roughly, I don't give two shits about the sanctity of your flow state. And yes, you guys, sometimes the entry-level spam that we sometimes have to endure from the comfort of our Herman Miller chairs can be a little bit, it can be a little bit much. But either ignore it completely or just take a few minutes to level up the recruiter's education. It's better for the soul. Now, a final illustration on gratefulness. While I was preparing this very presentation, I tried to make a joke on LinkedIn, it never goes well, about looking for those American chopper picks and how I think now I'm in the market for a virtual assistant. I was joking. But within an hour, I had real people reaching out to me to be my VA. You can look at this as super annoying comment spam, or you can have some compassion and see it as someone that's just trying to scratch out a living. And that's my point, you guys, is that right now we are in demand. And we are not out there actively looking for jobs, but that is not going to last for forever. And when the time comes that we're shopping our resumes around the brave new world trying to look relevant, you might think back to the good old days of being annoyed with recruiters, and you might think, man, what an asshole.
All right, thanks a lot. Let's give another big hand of applause for all of our Ignite speakers. We all know how utterly difficult that is.